You're listening to Good News Devos on U-Nite Radio. I'm David.
And I'm Anna. Has something ever happened to you that turned your world upside down, changing everything? Maybe your parents got divorced or you had to move.
Joseph's world was turned upside down a lot. He was sold into slavery, became the most trusted slave in his master's household, then was thrown in prison. But God was with Joseph and was planning something amazing. Soon, Joseph's world would be changed again.
God allowed Joseph to gain the trust of the prison keeper, who put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners.
Man, even in prison, Joseph still got great promotions. One day, there were two new prisoners, Pharaoh's chief baker and chief cupbearer. The baker was in charge of making Pharaoh's food. The cupbearer served the food and drinks.
One morning, Joseph noticed that both the baker and the cupbearer looked upset. "What's wrong?" Joseph asked. "We each had a dream," they answered, "but no one can tell us what they mean." In Egypt, the meaning of dreams was a big deal. There were even men called wise men whose job it was to interpret the meaning of dreams.
But Joseph knew that only God knew the true meaning of dreams. So he told the baker and the cupbearer to tell him their dreams, and God would tell Joseph their meanings. The cupbearer went first. He said, "In my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand."
Do you think God told Joseph the meaning of this strange dream? He did. The 3 branches stood for 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh would let the cupbearer out of prison and give him his job back.
Joseph told the cupbearer to remember Joseph and tell Pharaoh about him after his release. It was hard to be in prison for something that he didn't do.
When the baker heard the cupbearer's dream meant something good, he was excited to hear his dream's meaning. He told Joseph, "There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head."
Sadly, the meaning of the baker's dream brought bad news. The 3 baskets also meant 3 days. On the 3rd day, Pharaoh would have the baker killed. 3 days later, both dreams came true. Joseph waited and waited for Pharaoh to let him out of prison, but the cupbearer forgot to tell Pharaoh about Joseph. Joseph must have been disappointed. Maybe this made him wonder if God had forgotten him too.
Have you ever wondered if God has forgotten about you? When your world is turned upside down, it can be easy to feel forgotten and alone. But if you are a child of God, God has promised to always be with you.
In Hebrews 13:5, God promises, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." God will never leave you all alone, and He will never forget you. Maybe this is hard to believe because people in your life have left you. But God isn't like people. He always keeps His promises. And in Hebrews 13:5, God promises to never leave you. You can trust that God's love for you and His promises to you will never change.
God knows when you feel alone and forgotten, but no matter where you go, what you do, or what happens to you, God will always be there. You can count on God when your world feels like it's been turned upside down. You can trust God's promise to stay with you.
Joseph could trust that God was with him too, even when it felt like he had been forgotten.
Joseph may not have known it, but God's plan was in action. One night, Pharaoh had 2 strange and troubling dreams, but his wise men had no idea what they meant.
But then, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He finally told Pharaoh about him, and Pharaoh ordered Joseph to be brought before him. When Joseph met Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, "I heard you can interpret dreams. Is this true?" But Joseph gave a surprising answer. Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Joseph told Pharaoh God was the only one who knew the meaning of dreams.
Pharaoh's dreams were very similar to one another. In the first dream, Pharaoh saw 7 healthy fat cows and 7 scrawny sick cows. The sick cows ate up the healthy cows, but the 6 scrawny cows didn't get better.
In his second dream, he saw 7 healthy heads of grain and 7 dead heads of grain. The dead heads destroyed the healthy ones. But like the sick cows, the deadheads did not get better.
God told Joseph that both dreams had the same meaning. The 7 healthy cows and healthy heads of grain stood for 7 good years of harvest and food in Egypt. There would be more food than the whole country could eat. But the 7 sick cows and dead heads of grain stood for 7 years of horrible famine. A famine is when no food grows so that people don't have enough to eat. Everyone in Egypt would be so hungry they would forget how good the last 7 years were. God gave Pharaoh both dreams because they would come true soon.
How do you think Pharaoh felt? Maybe he was surprised or worried. God used Joseph to give Pharaoh advice about how to save food during the 7 good years so that Egypt would have enough to survive the 7 bad years of famine. Pharaoh would need someone very wise to put this plan into action.
If you were Pharaoh, who would you think would be the right man for this job? If you said Joseph, you're right. In fact, Pharaoh made Joseph second command of all of Egypt.
Whoa, that's the best promotion you could get in Egypt. Maybe now Joseph was starting to see God's plan. If Joseph hadn't been in prison or had been released earlier, he wouldn't have met the cupbearer who told Pharaoh about him. God was with Joseph through the good and bad times and was working everything out for good.
If you are a child of God, God has promised to be with you too. Listen to how the Bible describes God's presence in Psalm 46, verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. God promises to be a present help. He is always there to help you. You can count on Him to give you strength.
When you're sad because your world is turned upside down and you feel forgotten or alone, pray and ask God for strength and comfort. You can count on God to answer your prayer because He has promised to always be with you. You can also remember stories of times when God helped others to encourage you, like Joseph's. God used even the hard things in Joseph's life for good.
Pharaoh gave Joseph his ring, a symbol of authority. It meant Joseph could do anything Pharaoh could do.
But God wasn't done working yet. Something else was coming. But what? And how would God work?
You're going to have to join me and David on Good News Devos next time to find out.
We can't wait!